Okay, this is our second series of shiurim on contemporary issues in Hashkafa. And just to review for a sec, our first series of 6 shiurim basically dealt with what I felt was a major issue in a major contemporary issue that permeates all Hashkafa, which is the advent of autonomy, the value of autonomy in the Jewish world, or in the world that came out of the Age of Reason. And that advent of autonomy created a lot of different repercussions. It created the whole concept of development of rights. You have from the American fathers of independence were built upon the concepts of people like Rousseau, Voltaire, the development of reason, and so forth and so forth. So the point is that permeated the whole idea, and that became a strong value consciousness in America. Completely changed around the whole Western value system from a value system dominated by the Catholic Church to a value system that basically preached the value of the individual and autonomy. And therefore, this change affected the Jewish world. Now, it affected, before you get into issues in terms of straight issues of Hashkafa, it changed the Jewish world, because out of that concept developed the major motivations for the development of Reform Judaism and Zionism, which basically what occurred with Reform Judaism was that Reform Judaism took on the value of autonomy and declared that to be the most significant value. For example, to put it in terms, autonomy declares the value of Nishma before Nasa, and completely challenges the concept of a value in Nasa and Nishma. Because using these terms, this is complete abikursis now, but the point is that in Nasa, in stating Nishma before Nasa, you're saying that the only value is when the individual understands what they are doing and finds value in what they're doing, then they can do it, which is really what is at the essence of Reform Judaism. It basically challenged the concept that we don't want authority, we want autonomy, and only time it becomes valuable is when you find value in it, which really finds expression in modern day Reform Judaism, because if you're aware of it, I think in the 90s, Reform Judaism started talking about return to tradition. They started talking to return to tradition, and they started encouraging some observance of Shabbat, and even some observance observance of kashrut. There was an interesting article by Rabbi Jim Panett, who is the Hill director at Yale University, who I know. Jim, in his normal behavior, you would think he's a frum guy. Okay, I'm telling you, he looks frum. His behavior is basically frum, so forth and so forth. I was a little shocked to hear that Jim was the one who married, what's her name? Chelsea Clinton. What's her name, right? Right? Okay, which was an intermarriage. So Jim wrote an article about that, and he wrote an article how when he first went to Hebrew Union College, because Jim is a graduate of Cincinnati, of Hebrew Union College, and he went there. He said, when I first went there, they served cheeseburgers in the cafeteria. So then we moved more and more traditional. Jim himself went off to Eretz Yisrael. He studied there. He got involved. He went to Far Chabad. He got involved, so forth and so forth. But Jim was always stated he was Reform. He knew he was a Reform rabbi. He adopted all these practices and all these observances from a concept of it means something to me, therefore I'm going to do it. And that's where Reform Judaism really found it. Then it moved away to say the rituals are crazy and so forth. But the fact is that's an essential concept in the saying. And it started with this concept of autonomy. And it's going back to this concept of autonomy, that the way you find value is when there's autonomy, when you find value in it. So the fact is we talked about that. And then eventually, as Reform Judaism went into religion, the Tzionim developed the other side to looking at who you are as a Jew, the separation between religion and nationalism. So we started talking about this last week, how Reform Judaism went into religion, and the Tzionim developed into the nation. It's just something I read today someone sent me something. It's actually something that's up on our blog, on the Nishma blog. I think it's going to be up tomorrow morning. Is a link to an article that someone wrote in the Jewish press. I think Rabbi Phil Lefkowitz, and he was talking about what's called, I think, the Blackstone Protocol. And the Blackstone Protocol was an evangelical minister in the 1890s who advocated for the establishment of a state for Jews who were expelled cruelly by the Romans, and it's right for the Jews to come back. And he got a tremendous amount of people to sign his document. I think he got Supreme Court justices. He got he got the Rockefellers to sign it back then. He had some major people to sign it to basically say the Jews have a right to return to the land. Now, the thing that hit me is that he basically, he actually advocated for the fact that we have to take care of the Jews. We are responsible for their persecution and so forth. We have a responsibility to take care of the Jews. His actual advocacy of Zionism, though, in terms of its true language. Okay, in other words, the first part of it was the Jews aren't responsible, for anything. They've been subject to Christian anti-Semitism, which is wrong. Basically, it's wrong to blame them for for what happened in terms of Christian theology and so forth. But when it came to actually advocating for Zionism, even though he had all these people signing it, it was very interesting. He said the actual vote. He put together a council of Christian and Jews. And at this vote of the Council of Christian Jews, there was a motion to support Zionism, the return to Israel. It was defeated. Not by the evangelicals, not by the Christians there. It was defeated by the Reform rabbis who were at the event. Because the Reform rabbis didn't want anything to do with a definition of a Jew tied to nation. The fact the Reform movement had to completely change in order to support Zionism. It's just a reflection of things that we talked about last time in terms of the movement, all starting with that development of autonomy, questioning who we are, what we are Jews, and so forth and so forth. So, and I showed that in certain ways how this developed, and we're going to follow through on those ideas. This is the major issue to me, I think, when we talk about contemporary issues. It's the development of autonomy and how it completely affected the Jewish world and how it affected the outside world and how we relate to the outside world. Okay, but the fact is as we went through this last time, what I thought we would do start this series is I want to take a little bit of a look at a question which I really didn't fully deal with, and that is the concept of the very title of the series, Contemporary Issues in Hashkafa. Okay, what makes a contemporary issue? What is unique about a contemporary issue versus a regular issue in Hashkafa? If I wanted to do a series of shirim on Hashkafa, we could talk about Achdus, we could talk about Chira, we could talk about all these things. What is unique about a contemporary issue? And what makes it somewhat different in Halacha? So I want to use as an example, starting point, the question of what a contemporary issue we're talking about Hashkafa, what a contemporary issue in Halacha is. Okay, so you see things like there's a journal out, the Journal of Halacha in Contemporary Society. Okay, what do you call it? Rabbi Bleich has books out on contemporary topics in halacha. What is unique about a contemporary issue? The fact is when you think about a contemporary issue, the first thing you're going to think about is something that is a new metzias, right? When electricity started, we had a question: can you turn on an electric light on Shabbos? So that would be a contemporary issue. Here's something new. What's the issue? In vitro fertilization. Is it okay? All these issues that come up because of new things. Okay, that's one area of contemporary issues in halacha. There's another area that's a little bit more esoteric. Okay, is DNA testing evidence al pi halacha of a halachic issue? Okay, can DNA testing be used in the verification of a halachic issue? Okay, that happens to be a significant question. Okay, because so you have stuff in terms of yichus or whatever. You have to al pi shnai medim. You have to have two witnesses, so forth and so forth. Can you rely upon DNA testing to say no, this person is connected to that person? Okay, it's a different type of situation. It's more involved in process. right? So the fact is there's one which actually is a change in Metzias, which is, that's the question what we're dealing with. The next one is the fact that there's changes in the world that change the process of what we're doing with. Like, for example, the role of psychology. There's a definition in halacha of the shoita, right? A shoita is not mechuyev in mitzvahs, right? Can you use psychological definitions of, let's say, schizophrenia or something like that to redefine the concept of shota? The Gemara gives some example of a shota. It says, for example, a person who stays in a cemetery overnight. That's an example of a shota. But can we look at schizophrenia in the definition of a shota? Can we look at psychological definitions in the definition of a shota? So that becomes that we've come up to new ideas, and how does this new ideas not affect actual case? It's not cases that Halacha has to speak about, but it's actually changes in our process because of how we look at things because of a change of reality. Then there's another type of change. Okay, for example, let's take the case of a guna. Right? When we think of the case of a guna, what immediately comes to mind? Think of a woman who can't get a get. And usually we put that in the context of a woman who can't get a get because of some improper behavior by her husband. That's usually what we think about, right? Okay, and therefore we look back in history and look at all the cases of guna and so forth and so forth. The fact is that term aguna, as it applies today, is very, very different than than the case for that term in the literature. In the literature, the case of aguna was much more of a case of factually we can't establish the death of a husband. There's a very different dynamic in the case. So the fact is that it's an aguna case. The woman's not getting a get. Okay, it means that she can't get remarried. The definition of that term is really applicable. Yet it's not exactly the same mechanics underlying that term. In the past, it was basically an issue of fact. Okay, where's the husband? This woman can't remarry because we can't establish that she's now, now able to be remarried, single enough to be able to be remarried. Nowadays, she is actually the victim of some type, often a victim of some type of improper behavior. So the fact is the mechanics behind that. Can that yield change in the halacha, or can that be a reason to cause change in the halacha? So the fact is you see this somewhat differently. Well, there's a new concept that was never that never existed for many years. It could have existed for years. Why didn't they have this concept of in the past? Rabbanim never created this concept in the past. All of a sudden, we are going, well, let's try and create this concept right now. Like, for example, this was done by let's say the one who in the frum world, the one who's usually associated with this, with putting a thigh in kedushin, of trying to create a way that you always sidestep the issue of aguna, is Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz. We got a tremendous amount of Eliezer Berkowitz was a big time chacham. He was on the Sridi Eishes Bezdin, right? So you don't get on the Sridi Eishes Bezdin if you don't know something, right? And he was a major figure in the more left-leaning world of Orthodox Judaism. And he advocated for putting in tanais to try and prevent the situation of aguna. And the point is, most Rabbanim said that disagreed with his arguments. That's halachic disagreements, problematic, so forth and so forth. Okay, that's a halachic issue. Okay, but one of the things that came up was, here you are coming with this new idea. This is not something out of the Weltline. It's not something that you just thought of out of thin air. This is a concept that could have existed throughout ages, that could have changed the reality of aguna throughout ages. So therefore, the fact that previous Rabbanim never created this halachic status this Tanai in the Kedushin should stand for the fact that they all rejected this possibility, because there was always a tremendous desire in halacha to find a heter for an aguna. Like in 9/11, it's supposedly every aguna case in 9/11 was rectified to the declaration they weren't agunas. Okay, which is and throughout there was a case. I know there was a gadol who, after the First World War, one of his great statements of fame, I forget who it was the fact that he had something like hundreds of aguna cases, and he found a heter for every one. So there was always a tremendous motivation to find heterim for agunas. The point is that this new Tanai that Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz is coming up, if that was possible, they would have done it in the past, because everyone wanted to get rid of the agunas. One of the arguments for why he said to do it now was because of the new situation. He said that in the past they didn't have people withholding gittin. The aguna situation was a factual. Now they have people acting improperly, right? We can't look to the past, the fact that they didn't do something as a bar to us doing something. Okay, that's a significant concept in halacha. If we see things change, one of the issues in halacha is, hey, they didn't do it in the past. So if they didn't do it, it means it must not be okay. But the point is one of the things is that if what is occurring today creates a new situation that wasn't thought of in the past, then you might want to say that's an example for doing it. This leads into tremendous halachic issues. The most classic one, let's say, being women being shechtim. Right, where you have a concept of women, of women being shechtim or not, and there's a concept in halacha that people say, well, there's a minhag for women not to be shechted. You don't see women shechted. Right, basically. Tell us whatever it is. Other people say, what kind of minhag is that? You can't have a minhag because it didn't happen. That's a minhag. Okay, so that becomes an issue in itself. It's sort of a concept. If people never find these type of heterim in the past, maybe you shouldn't do it today, because you see they didn't do it. The point is, you look at it and say, well, wait a second, maybe there's a reason why they didn't do it, and there's some new maps of today, new situation that forces us to do it. So that's an example of another contemporary issue in halacha. But it's a different type of contemporary issue. It's basically saying that the factors involved in this halachic situation are different today and yields a different aspect. So the point is that but it starts with changes in Metzias. But the point is, what are those underlying factors in the changes in Metzias? Some are absolutely new things, like electricity. Some is redefining what occurs today, what is actually today. Another classic example would be for example, a person's Machal Shabbos. Right? The Gemara is very clear. A person's Machal Shabbos for Hashia, it's Gemara Kulin, is considered to be a Minachol Torah Kula. It's considered to be a heretic. And therefore, in many ways, he doesn't count. He doesn't have in many ways doesn't have a din of a Jew in many ways. So, for example, if a Machal Shabbos for Hashia touches wine, then wine is Yain Stam. Machal Shabbos for Hashia Shchit is no good. Things of that nature, clearly. Okay. What happens today? Okay, you have Machal Shabbos before Hashia. So the fact is, there are people who say that's the halacha. The halacha says the Machal Shabbos for Hashia is Machal Shabbos for Hashia. But the truth is, there are other people. I think the Ben Yassian, who is Rosh Shmuel Hirsch's Rabbi, and other people, I think developed the concept. I know the Tue Jun speaks about it. The fact is Bisman Hazeh, the Machal Shabbos for Hashia is completely different. Back then, that person was like Spinoza, basically saying, "Hey, I'm leaving. I don't want anything to do with the Jewish community. I completely disagree with you." He says nowadays, and there's cases like this. Remember, there's a case of one person was in an apartment on the Lower East Side, one Chashva Rav, and he was leaving out. He noticed with Shabbos, that there was a man who was putting on tefillin on Shabbos. I looked at a guy, one of them said, "Excuse me, it's Shabbos." He says, "I know, but I'm going to work. If I had to treat Shabbos like a chol, I have to put on tefillin on Shabbos. So this Rav walked away and said, this is not a normal case. You can't take the concept of Chal Shabbos for Hesya from the Gemara. It's completely different cases. I mean, you hear cases like this. There's shuls in the world where they set the Shabbos davening, or at 7 o'clock in the morning, because people want to chop around and daven in B'minyan before they go off to work. That's a completely different. So people have this issue. Chal Shabbos says, is that the same case, or is that a different case? So that's a different aspect of a change in Metzias. It's a change in Metzias. The electricity is a completely new idea. Here you have something that's old that the Halach speaks about, but the dynamics involved in what creates that situation today is different. So how does that affect the Halacha? So that's an aspect of Halacha. So the fact that you see in Halacha there's completely new issues, but then there's other issues in Halacha where first of all, there is a change, but is that change recognized by the halacha, and does that change affect the psak? Because a lot of people say, no, Chal Shabbos for Hesya, Chal Shabbos for Hesya. And there's the same thing, and the guy is kaifer in Brias Olam, and that's it. And also, and the psak the same. Other people say it's a completely new category. Other people say the psak has to change, okay, because of the dynamics. Okay, so you see how contemporary issues can change everything, because you can deal with issues that have existed for years, but the contemporary dynamics underneath it are different, and therefore you have a different conclusion reached. Okay, so now let's take this into the realm of hashkafa. Okay? So what we see is the world is dynamic. Okay? The world is constantly in flux. Okay? So the question is, how does this dynamic, the world in flux, affect Torah? Okay? Torah is static from perception. Here's the Torah, and therefore there's a dynamic flux in the world. How does it relate to it? So one is the fact that there are changes in the world. So how do we relate to changes in the world? For example, how do we relate in a Canada, in an America, to a country that treats us in such a welcoming and fair way? So the fact is that the lot of hashkafa concept over there, bordering on halacha, that attitudes that existed to our attitudes to previous being under governments are different, because those governments are hostile. These governments are very welcoming. So there's actually concepts of being there's clear concepts of a call upon Jews to be good citizens, but it's now even doubly so because they've treated us so well. Okay, so there's aspects of that kind of Metzias change. Okay, but then there's also concepts of a change in the perceptions. Okay, and how do we relate to changes in perceptions? So there's actually new categories. So how do we relate to them? To friendly governments. Okay, to values that exist that are new situations of relating to concepts of autonomy. Okay, other things that the Rishonim never heard about, that now exist in terms of the values of the world. But there's things that are that on the surface are the same, and we don't know whether they've this change. How do we relate to the fact that it's changed? Because the change seems to be contrary to hashkafa. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Let's take the example of women. Okay? Okay, so women are much more independent than they used to be. Right? Okay. So because of that, there's certain attitudes or certain hashkafic concepts that seem to be seem to define women a certain way. Right? Okay. Now we see today that women aren't acting that way. But they're still women. Right? And we have a whole history in hashkafa that says this is what women are. So it's similar to the cases I gave you before, like the Machal Shabbos for Hesya, in a sense, but it's from a hashkafic perspective. In other words, it's not a new concept. It's not a friendly government. It's something that's there, right? I presume women today look like women 20 years ago as well, right? The same way as Mochal Shabbos today is not keeping Shabbos the way Talmud 20 years didn't keep Shabbos. Did Averos. But the point is that but we see the woman today acting differently, much more independent. Okay, but in that independence, they have a totally. It really challenges all the hashkafa. So what do we say about the hashkafa? Okay, give you an example. Okay, there's a concept of tuva meitav tandu meitav ormala, right? That a woman would rather be with anybody than to be alone. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean 100% of the time, so forth and so forth, because obviously someone would want to get divorced, and the Gemara talks about cases where women do demand divorce, and so forth and so forth. But there's a general concept that women, are willing to want to be in a relationship. Okay. Pardon? Men too, but not to the same extent that we saw women to be. Okay, the halachic concept is that men want to be in a relationship, but they have some standards. Women have lower standards; they're willing to take anyone.
Because of greater economic dependence.
So your argument is because of greater economic dependence. That's historically that would seem to be historical. So the fact is, there's a Rabbi Emanuel Rackman, another liberal, very liberal, but a very respected Rav for many years. He maintained. He wrote a book called One Man's Judaism, and he raises the question of whether tuva meitav tandu meitav ormala applies with Zman hazeh. Okay. The story goes, and I've actually heard different aspects of it. I heard one person say it never really happened, but it seems to be that the evidence is Rav Yosef Ber at an RCA convention, right? So Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, right, the Gadol Hador, right, especially of that world, at an RCA convention, basically stated that concept by Rabbi Rackman is apikorsis. Okay, that basically, okay. This is, from what I understand, the Rav said it was an ontological concept, which means that it is inherent. If Chazal says it's an ontological concept that must be existent, therefore it exists today as well. So the question is, it emerges, but you see women are acting more independent. That's not really for some reason they're acting that way, but that's not really what they're feeling underneath. Now the fact is that statement is made by the Rav. So you can't just throw it aside, right? And once the Rav said that, basically, that ended any support for Rabbi Rackman's perception. But it does initiate a lot of the issue, in the sense that, this is finish my sentence. In the sense that what you find is that we see things that have been existent for years, that we have hashkafic concepts attached to it for reasons, and developed them. We're now seeing issues today that seem to challenge that hashkafa. So it's not just cases. What do you do with a new situation? It's what do you do with the fact that there are new issues in our world today that seem to be pushing us to reinvestigate ideas that have been around for ages and have been fundamental in the hashkafa process. How can we deal with it? Yeah.
Just more of that concept of a change, like a concept of a yevama. I mean, we always now do a chalitza.
Right.
I mean, then it must have been a wonderful thing that a woman knew that if, God forbid, she was in that situation, she would be taken in by the family. But now, to be tied, when you could have freedom to have choice, it's I think it bears out in the actual practice that we don't see the completion. We see the chalitza process.
Right. I mean, the fact is that the concept is Ashkenazim do chalitza, Sephardim still do yibum. From what I hear, Sephardim do yibum, but basically in Ashkenazim there's a concept of always doing chalitza. The argument that's presented is for chalitza was that to do Yibum correctly, you really should have the proper intention. Okay, and the intention should be to fill the mitzvah of Yibum. If there's an intention where the parties to the Yibum, i.e. the ex-brother-in-law and the woman are saying, hey, this is really great, we're going to get married now, then that seems to detract from the true mitzvah of Yibum, and it borders on the concept. I mean, if they're saying Yibum is a very difficult concept from a halachic concept, because otherwise it's a rayas. So here's a woman who otherwise should be an incestual relation to you, they have a heter for it. So there's questions like, so the argument was made that we went to chalitza because to do Yibum correctly, because it's such a difficult concept of saying you have a heter to sleep with someone who is otherwise an arayas to you, so therefore you want to make sure that it's l'shem mitzvah that it's done. But the fact is, today there's no doubt about it. Women being told about this, if they didn't have chalitza, they would find it very difficult to be involved in Yibum. They look at Yibum as a very difficult concept because of that change in perception. So you see, it's an example of these type of changes in terms of how we look at it. That's also connected to why do people get married and what are they looking for in marriage and so forth, change in economic circumstances and so forth. So the point is you have cases that in other words, situations today that technically can be compared to situations throughout history, but the fact is the dynamics that create the situation are now different. So how do you relate to this? I know that I did I think I just wrote a insight on this idea about Yibum, in the sense that there's ideas where women wanted to miss Yibum. You have the case of Tamar, where she went out of her way to do Yibum. It was so important for her to do Yibum. They understood the importance of it. Today, women are thankful that they have chalitza. Okay, so the fact is, you see consciousness change. So how does this affect our understanding of the hashkafa in this idea, and looking at this, and how it can affect it? And really, what happens in this way, it creates a much more dynamic understanding of Torah, in the sense that if our perceptions change over history, obviously you're not changing the halacha, but the fact is that it raises a question of a much more dynamic understanding of the principles involved.
What about the ability to take more than one wife? I mean, is that not part and parcel?
Well, the truth is that it was always a value only to have one wife. You look at the Avos. Avram only wanted one wife.
But did he not effectively have three wives?
No, no. When Torah was after first wife, I mean, everyone. There's no doubt the concept of there's a zivig rishon or there's a beshert or whatever you want to call it. There's the prime wife, and then if you can marry another woman if you're divorced or you're widowed or whatever. I'm not going to get into issues of who's your zivig rishon, who's considered to be, the classic concept over there is that 40 days before a baby's born, they said, so and so to so and so, and it seems to be that the way it's expressed is that it's one neshama split in two, and they're looking to join it. That's considered to be zivig rishon. Zivig sheni is Kosh Baruch Hu takes two halves and tries and pairs them up, right? But it's not the one neshama that is broken and then easy to put together again. I mean, that's classical explanations. The point is, most people say the first person you married is zivig rishon, and everyone else said that's not so clear cut. There's a Rabbi Yaakov Emden that says that who's to say that it's the first person you married. There is a concept of the best coupling, and then there are secondary couplings. But he says, who says it's the first person you married? So he brings an example from David Melech. Who was the zivig rishon of David Melech? Michal, Bathsheba, Abigail. Right? You choose. It's not, what? Right, Leah Rachel is also. I mean, Rachel seems to be that was it, and then because of certain aspects. So the truth is, though, is there was always a concept of only being married to one person at one time. That seems to have been a value. Abraham only moved away from it on the insistence of Sarah. He was reluctant, but Sarah sort of insisted, and that was for the purpose of having a kid. Yeah, he married Keturah again because there is a concept of a person shouldn't be alone. Yitzchak only had one wife. Yaakov only wanted one wife, and that was because, and then this got the whole thing with Rachel and Leah, so he didn't want to divorce Leah, and but he obviously still wanted to be married to Rachel. And then the question of Bilhah V'Silpah was because of the insistence of the imachot. So the point is, but there, I think there's one case I read somewhere that there's only one case in the Gemara of a person in the Gemara, one of the Rabbanim in the Gemara, who had more than one wife at the same time. Okay, so the fact is, but I mean, you're getting into issues like this. But the point is that there are attempts to try. I mean, you're still dealing with these issues that things have changed and so forth and so forth. But the fact is, there are things that are the same as they were on the surface. A woman is still a woman, but the dynamics that seem to be underneath it are going to change. And that's what makes contemporary issues in Hashkafa so powerful and dynamic. Because once you recognize those movements, it basically invigorates halacha with a dynamism. It basically says that things go through a whole change. If you come up with a new understanding of women today, and you say women are doing this today, it completely affects our whole understanding of women throughout the ages. Yeah.
These changes, though, are driven by the culture we live in.
Right.
Okay? And we live in primarily a Judeo-Christian environment here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole modernization and liberation of women in our society in North America is having an impact on how we interpret, the Judeo-Christian values, and in terms of Hashkafa, in terms of Yiddishkeit.
Right. I would refrain from using the word Judeo-Christian.
Okay.
Okay, for two reasons. Number one, I don't like the concept of Judeo-Christian because I think it's an inherent oxymoron of Judeo-Christian morals, values. Christianity is built upon values which are very, very different than Jewish values. Not all the Christian values. I mean, there are some Christian values that they got from us, but there are many, many Christian values that did not come from us. And people think they do because there's a similarity to it. So, for example, in terms of sexuality, okay, and I'm focusing, let's say, on Catholicism versus Judaism. The fact is that Judaism has a very has a restrictive view of sexuality, and Catholicism has a restrictive view of sexuality. But the difference between them might be like you see a do not touch sign. Okay, you could have a do not touch sign because by some special art, because it's fragile and it's expensive and so forth and so forth. Therefore, you say, hey, we got to treat this in a special way and put it in case and so forth because it's special. You have another do not touch sign because it's garbage and because it's something you don't want to touch. So the fact is that from a Jewish perspective, there's certain concepts of sexuality that are because we see the value in sexuality. Okay, there's a sefer called the Igeres HaKodesh, which for years was ascribed to the Ramban. Now people say it wasn't written by the Ramban, where basically he yells at the Rambam's view on sexuality and says, obviously it was created by Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Adam and Chava had relations before they ever ate of the Eitz Hadas Tov Hara, so for that it's very important to but we treat it with remarkable respect because it's such like you say, Igeres HaKodesh, such a holy concept. Within Catholicism, it's completely different. So you have people coming out and saying, you're restrictive on this, but it was two different motivations for the restriction. That's just an example of why I'm not happy with the Judeo-Christian. One reason I'm not happy. The other reason is because our present morality today, in many ways, is not even Christian. As I mentioned beforehand, so much of our world today in America comes from rights, right? We're all advocating for rights and so forth and so forth. Now, it's true everyone likes to go back to Plymouth Rock and saying it came with the Puritans and so forth and so forth, but basically the American concept of freedoms, which really permeate all our values, really came through Frenchmen like Voltaire and Rousseau, and they weren't big fans of the Catholic Church. right? That's to say the least. A lot of our concepts really come from a rejection of Christianity and the value of the human being. Okay. Anyways, but that's your point. But without having said all that, it's true that so much of what happens is that we're responding to our world around us, but we're seeing the values of it. Okay. Now, an example of that, and this is going to be the first topic I'm going to get to, is freedom of religion. We all think highly of the value of freedom of religion. We've benefited from the value of freedom of religion, right? Okay?
We don't necessarily value it within our own group.
Right? Is there a value within Torah of freedom of religion? Right? Okay? Look through the Chumash. What do we do with people practicing other religions? Right? It seems that we're not big fans of freedom of religion, but we've benefited from it. Ramosha called America the Medina Shel Chesed because we've accepted freedom of religion and we promote it. So the question is we've encountered this value, we've benefited from this value, therefore we have a positive feeling towards this value, which is what you're identifying, but it creates a whole new dynamic for us.
So look how the freedom of religion in Eretz Yisrael is causing us so much sorrow.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The fact is, how do you have a Jewish state when you promote democracy? But at the same point in time, no one wants to admit the stira, except for Rameir Kahana. He admitted the stira, which it's very interesting. Rameir Kahana had a whole debate with Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager used to come up with this pamphlet, this little thing called Ultimate Issues. And he wrote up about his big debate with Meir Kahana, and I can't believe it. Meir Kahana, wiped the floor with him, but he talked about it. I said he didn't even know how badly he was defeated by Meir Kahana. Meir Kahana's viewpoint was very simple. He said these concepts can't work in a Jewish state, right? But Americans like to believe we can be democratic and a Jewish state. So what are you going to do with giving everyone a vote? We always sidestep it. By definition, the law of return is not a democratic concept, right? From an American perspective. Okay. The point is that there are tensions between the two. Yeah.
To clarify, do we not believe that others who are not born Jewish have the right to choose how they relate to religion?
To religion?
Others who are not, do we not believe in that? He is not born Jewish, he has a right to choose if he is going to be religious and in what.
Is that true? Can a non-Jew practice idolatry? We got 7 Noachide laws.
So we're saying
the Rambam's language on the 7 Noachide laws is Kaifin Koba'i Olam. Kaifin means beat. He says you force everyone in the world to follow the 7 laws of Noah. Now, Rabbi Michael Broyd has a whole article that says the Rambam is a minority opinion on that we don't have an obligation to impose the Noachide code on non-Jews or even to teach it and so forth and so forth. Though the idea of being you look at Avram Avinu. What did Avram Avinu do? Everyone likes to talk about Jews not being proselytized. What was the uniqueness of Avram Avinu? Because he went out there proselytizing not to Judaism but to belief in one God. That's what stood Avram Avinu out. That's what he stood. He wasn't just a religious person like Shem and Noach. And so we keep our religion. We just maintain ourselves. He was out there in the world spreading the belief in one God. The point is, we don't say you have to be Jewish, but the concept of the 7 Noachide laws is there, and we're not very tolerant of idolatry. Okay, when Yeshua went into Canaan, he didn't practice freedom of religion. Basically said, okay, we're giving you 3 choices. A, get out. B, follow the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. Or C, die. That's what Yeshua did when he went into right. Now the truth is, it's a different situation there was with that conquest, and it's not applicable to our world today. And I can give reasons for that when we talk about freedom of religion. But the point is that it's a very, we aren't big fans of freedom of religion. It would seem. On the other hand, we are. We benefited from it. Okay, we have to get a little bit more into this, but the point is that I think we have a different view between the religion, which we'll talk about. The fact is, though, is that that's an example of a change in values and so forth and so forth. But the point is that what's unique about Hashkafa is the dynamics. I'll give one more case about this, which is involved in women. Okay, we talk about women being much more independent and so forth. So the Gemara talks about, okay, how in Hashkafa women are actually wished to be dominated. Okay, we have a concept in the Chumash that says that Adam that Chava would say Behu Yim Shal Bach, right? That Adam will be over you in authority, right?
Punishment.
So that's a punishment. Yet earlier, okay, it seems that we have it for the concept of Kikshua and some other concepts like that. Before some point out that value of the man being dominant seems to be a value, not just a punishment. It seems to be a value. Now, if it is a value, so that basically says yes, women want to be led by their husbands. Okay, they want to be secondary. Okay, which Ezer Kenegdo, stuff like that. It works out very nicely if you believe the woman wants to be secondary. That's all the midrashim, with Lilith and all those other stuff. Which Lilith was Adam's first wife, and she wanted to be equal, and all these other stuff. That's why you have that magazine Lilith, right? That is feminist and so forth. Anyways. I don't want to get involved in that issue, in all those issues, but it does seem on the surface, is it a punishment? Okay, so the people say, yeah, it's like that, but it really was a punishment. Now you see women not wanting to be so dominated, right? They want to have, they basically want a greater equality, and also like the same status as men. So there is a viewpoint in Kabbalah that says that that Chava's relationship to Adam after the Eitz Das Tovara is similar to the relationship of the Levana to the sun.
Reflecting.
Well, what happened then? You had two moros, you had two lights in the sky. Okay, and then they said, hey, you can't have two lights in the sky. Who's in charge? So God said, okay, we'll reduce one of them to be the moon, and then there'll be the sun and the moon, the sun being dominant and the moon being secondary, and that this is the same relationship as between man and woman will be the same relationship as between the sun and the moon. Great. It's only one issue.
There's no source of light from the moon.
You're right. That shows how secondary. That shows how secondary it is, how dominant it is by the sun. However, it says V'Yimosa Mashiach, the moon will return to its previous glory. So lo and behold, there are positions in Hashkafa that say, as you get close to Yemei HaMashiach, women will also start, spreading their wings a little bit. Okay, so there are people who write today, the fact that you have women's liberation and the fact that you have this women wanting to have more involvement, and say that people will say, yeah, that's a reflection that we're getting close to Moshe Mashiach, because this is what the women also want to return to their, like the moon wants to be equal to the sun. Okay? So the fact is these are all, now the truth is when you hear these type of things, it creates a dynamic. Because you have a whole hashkafa built up on a certain attitude towards women, okay? And now you say, wait a second, and now you see it's a little bit more dynamic than that. Is it good? Is it not good? Is it a punishment? Before someone asks that question, there seems to be some points that seem to imply that women being dominated was a punishment to Chava, which means it really is not something she's going to be happy with. There's other people that say no. There's other sources that seem to imply that this is the way they were created. The fact is, in our world today, what happens with contemporary issues, it sort of creates the dynamics of getting things going. It's like you're throwing bowling chips into it. Now, you see this in reaction of certain people where they want to go back to the old world because it was nice and simple. But the fact is, when you start seeing all these movements and so forth, it doesn't just mean how do I relate to a modern concept today. It's, boy, this modern concept permeates the whole world of Hashkafa. Yeah.
It's been my observation that in terms of religious frum Jews,
Yeah.
and the relationship between men and women is so different in different parts of the world. If you go to Australia, even the most frum Rabbanim there are liberal considered to the most frum Rabbanim here in Toronto.
Okay.
And they go by the societal norms and what is comfortable and acceptable in that community. So they judge that based on the community standards, which are very important. Because what happens, let's say in Sydney, Australia, may not be acceptable here in the community overall. Not saying that it's not halachically correct or whatever. It depends on their interpretation and how they want to proceed with it.
Right.
So if somebody from Australia comes here and the Rebbitzin sits next to a man at a table where maybe it's acceptable there, and here it's maybe not, you know, there's that conflict and interpretation. Oh, he's not so frum, maybe he's too frum, and we're too judgmental in our society.
The fact is that I just want to make I want to make a distinction. You see, the issue for me is not the fact that we do have some societal standards in the halacha. Okay, there's no doubt in rules of tznius, for example, it's very clear cut that there are certain that tznius in certain aspects of tznius are dependent upon society. Okay, so if there are certain things of tznius that if all the women started dressing a certain way, a frum person could not dress that way, because that's considered to be an objective challenge to the rules of tznius. But there are other aspects of tznius, like for example, what the Mishnah Berurah points out is, to the Mishnah Berurah, above the knee is inherent tznius. A woman has to wear a skirt to her knee. That's inherent tznius. Okay. The thighs is inherent tznius. What about from the knee to the ankle? So he says, if the society wears a skirt down to the knee to the ankle, then it's incumbent upon a frum woman also to dress that way.
Not to be any less.
Right, right. However, if in that society, so this is an example of what you're saying in Australia, if they wear skirts to the knees, then that's okay. But if she comes to another place and they're wearing skirts to their ankles, and that's proper behavior, then she has to start wearing skirts to her ankles. The other way around also. If a woman is in a place where they wear skirts to the ankles and she moves to another place where they wear skirts to the knees, then it's okay. Then the issue comes up, okay, what is defined as inherent erva and what's defined as societal erva? That's an issue in itself. Okay, so there's some issues like that. For example, with pants, with women wearing pants, for example. The Rabbanim who say that if the society wears pants, it's okay. Most Rabbanim aren't like that, but there are Rabbanim who say that. The fact is that, and obviously we're not talking about tight pants. We're talking about pants that meet some standards of tznius. But the fact is that's an issue in itself. But what's interesting to me is those laws that say you can relate to society. And then what you go further beyond that is the values in the society that lead to that. Let me give you an example of that. There's just we're going a little bit off topic here, but it's okay. Let me give you an example because I just mentioned to someone today. We were talking about attitudes of society and repercussions. So this individual was he wanted to understand some things about what's happening in Beit Shemesh and the gender and issues with gender in Israel, but beyond Israel. But I said to him, listen, and this is not in any way to be stated as any justification for that abhorrent behavior that occurred in Eretz Yisrael. And I'm not just talking about Beit Shemesh. There were other events there that were very, very negative as well. But the fact is you have to understand where these individuals are coming from. These individuals have no connection to women whatsoever. They live in societies that are one-gender societies.
But they don't have wives and daughters?
Wait a second. They have wives and daughters, but with limited interaction. Let me go further in this, okay? Right. Right. Wives and daughters. Okay, let me tell you what we're talking about here. We're talking about societies which are gender split. Okay, some of them, they don't even sit together Friday night at the table.
Really?
Okay? So you're talking a very, very split society where the women have their own society and the men have their own society. There's a book called Educated but Ignorant, which is a study of, it's called Educated but Ignorant. It's a study of Ger women in Tel Aviv. It was done for a PhD thesis by a woman at Hebrew U, and it gives you some indication of the women's society. It basically says it's a completely separate society. Okay, with very limited interaction. Don't forget, in some Hasidic communities, once a woman is a year away from bat mitzvah, okay, even her father won't be misyachid with her, won't be in the same room with her, alone, right?
How do you justify that halachically?
I mean, the fact is, it's crazy. I mean, the fact is that first of all, a father is allowed to be misyachid with his daughter. That's no question about that. The point is, they're being machmir. The truth is, well, the fact is where does it come from? So let me take it the next step further. The fact is so there was a non-Jewish philosopher by the name of Zizek. He's an Eastern philosopher, and he was talking about the following. He says that in Afghanistan, the Taliban started, I think it was the Taliban, he said they started having a thing where women dressed in everything to the, fully, everything's covered up. There became a new law that they can't walk with, that they cannot wear shoes that you can hear them walking. Okay? Okay, this became a big issue there, and women were punished. They cannot wear shoes. If you hear a click from their shoes, that's wrong. You have to be very, very quiet. Where does that come from? They're already dressed to the hilt. I mean, what are they doing? Because the fact is, in that society is strong. There's such a strong separation that once they think of woman is only sexual stimulant. Even if you don't see anything, I mean, think woman. Oh, already it means arousal. Right? So it doesn't matter. And then Zizek compares it to America, where he says there's things in America that seem to point to the fact that women are walking around any way they want to, and the sexual activity in America is falling because it's so commonplace that no one's getting excited anymore. Anyways, I don't think it means no one's ever getting excited anymore. But the fact is that Zizek develops this idea. Now the truth is what Zizek is really saying is, from an interesting idea, if you live in a society that makes a tremendous distinction between men and women, so that you're constantly saying you don't relate to women, the only concept you have when you see a woman is this is a stimulant. Okay, you have no.
Instead of raising someone to a spirit or to a mind, you've gone and done the opposite.
So the fact is you've basically gotten to the idea that you have no idea of this woman as an individual. Okay, should be Madam Curry. I have no idea, because once I hear the word Madam, I'm already thinking sex, right? So the fact is that's the distinction. So the point is that the argument against that position is exactly that. There's obviously limits. This is where you say about a chumrah. The point is that if you come around and say no, we're in favor of women wearing skirts to their knees, only to their knees. Something it's very nice, but you really want to be machmir. And by the way, this is a big mistake in a lot of the sneas arguments in Eretz Yisrael, in the sense that all these arguments in Eretz Yisrael is we don't have to do that. No, there's another side. You can't make it seem that we don't have to be so machmir, it's okay for women. You have to make it seem, and there's a reason we want only to define sneas this way. There's a reason we want women only wearing skirts to their knees, because there's a certain point in time where if you only focus on that, you don't see the woman as an individual. So the truth is, on the other hand, you have to be careful, and this is another side to the sneas rules, because the fact is entirely there seems to be another side, that you also don't want that sexuality to be totally lacking. So you want to balance the fact of individuality and some sexuality. The fact is that creates an tension. Now the truth is when you get involved in all this, this is really what becomes interesting, is that once you see hashkafa in the dynamic of the reality, and you follow the change in reality. We talked before with Yibum and Chalitza. The fact is, once you see hashkafa over history, then hashkafa becomes much more dynamic. There's a concept that says that there's one person who said, I only wait 6 hours between. It's 6 hours. It hasn't actually 6 hours. It's I get the language of more, but what is understood to be 6 hours. It's been between meals, whatever. But I only wait 6 hours. My father, between meat and milk, used to wait 24 hours. And that was a high madrega of my father. He actually kept more stringent rules. So you have one idea of chumrah being if a higher madrega, you do chumras. The more you're okay. There's another idea that if you're on a lower madrega, you have to do chumras because you have to have more of a siog, you have more of a fence. But the truth is, your tension is actually a different tension. It's actually a more intense tension. On one hand, we're looking back to Har Sinai and considering that the Dor Dea was the ideal, and we're just trying to make sure that we don't fall too far from the ideal. But there's the ideal. There's another view of Torah, and that is the ideal is Yemos Mashiach, and the idea that we're going towards the ideal, which means that we're getting closer to the ideal.
We have no Masorah for that.
No. What do you mean no Masorah? I mean,
we have no Masorah.
We have no idea of what it will be, but this concept of the fact that we're moving forward is clearly a concept that's mentioned in Hashkafa, that we're moving to somewhere. The idea that Yemos Mashiach is supposed to be at the conclusion of what we're doing here for 6,000 years. So, and the truth is, there's a Rabbi Dr. Silman, who's a professor at Bar Ilan, who came up with a sefer. He calls it two different things: the classical view of Revelation and the romantic view of Revelation. That one view of Revelation, classic view, is that Har Sinai was the ideal, and we're just trying to make sure we don't fall too far from it. The other view is what he calls the romantic view, which is that Har Sinai starts the process, but we're moving towards the ideal. And the truth is, both tensions exist.
When you say Har Sinai is the ideal, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean it's the people at that time? Because they weren't. Ego, right?
Well, the truth is that that's another problem. The fact is the Dor Dea is considered to be the greatest generation. At the same time, they did the ego. There's a lot. But by the way, what you're really getting into when you get into this stuff is the fact that everything is dynamic. There's a lot of tension in halacha. You can't make a statement in black and white. Okay.
Talking about black and white, it comes to showing you don't have a white shirt on, and it's blue. They think you're not so firm.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that's the mishagas.
You know, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. Okay. I had a secretary from Boston. Okay. And she told me the following story. I hope it's okay to put this on kosher too, but you hear the story and see if it's okay. She said that there's a Bikur Cholim committee in Boston, and they would cook for people. So the meeting of the board of directors of the Bikur Cholim committee was women, and they said, so we have to have a standard for who we're going to let cook for us. We can't let everyone cook. We have to have standard. So they said, okay, so what's going to be our standard? So they came up with the standard is the woman has to cover her hair. In order to cook for us, we only take women who cover their hair. We know it's a pretty high standard. So one woman said, we got a problem with that. A Tara Twersky cooks for us. You want to tell her you're not going to accept her kashrus? Now, who is a Tara Twersky? Tara Twersky was the Rav's daughter. And the Rav's daughter didn't cover her hair, because that was the Rav's wife didn't cover her hair, so she took the Rav. Whole issues about that, but the fact of the matter is that Tara Twersky was a great woman. She was married to Rav Yitzchak Twersky. She was the Rav's daughter, and she ran my Maimonides school. And are you going to tell her that she's not going to you're not going to accept her kashrus?
Wasn't she the founder of this Bikur Cholim committee?
I don't know. You heard that story too?
I've heard the story.
What?
You can leave it on. I've heard the story.
Okay. So the fact is they told it. So this woman told me, good, I'm glad. So in fact she told me what happened. So you know what happened in the end? They had this whole big fight. And they still voted that, no, you have to cover your hair, that's going to be our standard. We have to have some standard going to cover our hair. I was told that at the moment, 6 women immediately resigned from Bikur Cholim. Now, the truth of the matter is you're talking about being from, they have the standards. You think these women who were covering their hair were frummer than a Tara Twersky? I don't think so. You know what I mean? I mean, the fact is that's what happens with these standards. I mean, the truth is, because the Rav himself, went to university. You think other people didn't go to university are frummer than him? You know, the point is that that's a problem when we have standards, we don't know standards, because the truth is what's lost is the dynamic complexity of Judaism.
This is a huge problem in our society.
Absolutely.
It's a huge problem here in Toronto,
right.
and especially in North America, especially with shidduchim, okay?
Totally.
You know, this one, the hat is too big, the brim, this one, the brim is too small. You went out with a guy who has a black hat but has a red feather. You can't date guys who have red feathers.
Listen, the fact is in our world today, no one wants to know about the complexity of Judaism. Okay, I mean, I devoted my life to trying to talk about the complexity of Judaism, but that's why Nishma is not, you know, taking over the world. But the fact is that the reality is that people want simplicity, and Judaism is not simplistic. It's dynamic. It's complex and dynamic. Anyways, that's why I like dealing with contemporary issues.